Hello and welcome to another episode of Design Truth. I'm going to steal our sponsor's funky music. My name's Brad and today we are joined by Matthew Cockerill, previously of Samsung and SeymourPowell, to name a few, to understand the role that he plays in between bridging the business and design world. Lots to unpack and uncover here. This episode is brought to you by our sponsors Geomic. Geomic is the UK's leading digital manufacturing marketplace. You'll find some information on a bit of a discount you can get through Design Truth in the comments. I'll leave you to this music and I'll see you on the other side.
Presenting to clients or even doing presentations or representing companies, it's like you don't want them to remember everything. You're just trying to land a few key points, so that's fine.
Yeah, well, welcome to the podcast. Thanks for spending your Thursday evening with us. And I do apologise that it's been quite difficult to get this booked in through COVID, my end, and all this other palaver and stuff. But
and this is the last recording till Christmas,
it's the last recording till Christmas, so try and get up in December sometime.
Yeah,
Drew that was meant to be here isn't there. He's writing a book, and so he's basically told me that he needs to spend more time writing his book rather than talking to me. So he's kind of
got a deadline.
Yeah, someone must have said, "Have you started writing this thing yet?" And he said,
"Yes."
So
no, but I've spent the advance. That's
exactly. Yeah, so he's off doing that, and he'll kind of float in and out of the podcast every now and again. But there's a new co-host coming. I can't reveal who it is, but there's someone that actually knows about design as well. So it's perfect for me. So when things get technical, I just shut up. So it's a nice balance. So I'll try not to sound too much of an idiot over the next 45, 60 minutes or so. But
no, I think you're not pretending to be an industrial designer. So it's fine. Sort of working in that space, aren't you? Trying to understand us.
The day that happens is a dark day. The day I start showing my key shot stuff. Don't worry about that. But quickly, if you could just introduce yourself to the people, that'd be great.
Yeah, sure. So I'm Matthew. I'm an industrial designer, I guess, by training, or if I go back a bit further, actually, I trained as a mechanical engineer at university. And at the moment where I am in my career, I sort of, I work independently as a consultant, and I really sort of specialize in early stage design in innovation. So a lot of what I'm trying to do is inspire really companies about what they should be doing, rather than a sort of a traditional focus on design where it's about, we know what we want to make, can you design it, and we will ship it. And I guess I've been doing this for quite a while. I mean, Course 77 unfortunately described me as a veteran designer in the last article I did, which is a bit of a kick in the teeth. But yeah, I think I've been going about 25 years and been at lots of familiar consultancies, got my first chance at DCA through to sort of Priestman Good, Tangerine, worked for a few years in Seoul, South Korea, about 20 years ago now, 19 years ago. Spent about 11 years at SeymourPowell, and a couple of years I did heading up a studio for a Danish design company, and I've been independent now for about 3 years.
Yeah. In terms of this, where you sit now, is that something that's just festered over a period of time, in the sense of you just found this kind of...
I think it's evolved for sure. Yeah. You know, as somebody, I guess, it's interesting when I was at university and when I started in consultancies like DCA, you know, for me, design really started with a brief. So, you know, as a junior designer, somebody, you know, the director in the studio or the creative director goes, look, here's the brief from the client, or they've been working with the client to create a brief. And it's like, great, okay, we're going to do this. And hopefully they'll pick one and it will be made. And so I didn't really understand when I was younger how the brief was created. And I think over time, with my experience, I particularly going to Samsung actually in Korea, because there we did a lot of work working with R&D teams and working with product planning to help sort of explore rather than it wasn't ever going to ship necessarily, or it might do. But what we were trying to do is work out where there's a new opportunity. And I guess the reason for that is a lot of what Samsung is trying to do as a technology-driven company is, well, I guess it's arguable in some cases, but really try and break new ground, create new paradigms in technology, whether that's folding smartphones or kind of interesting TVs. And I guess traditionally a lot of design is actually about iterative things, about, okay, we've got product A, it's the vacuum cleaner, it's been doing well, the tooling's wearing out, let's have another go and see if we can improve it. Whereas the focus of a lot of the work that I did at SeymourPowell in the last sort of 6 years that I was there was working with technology-led companies to really uncover those things. So that was the space I sort of had experience of. And I guess now I'm older and becoming independent. One of the things I think, and your challenge is how do you sort of stand out as an independent designer? As a designer with lots of experience, having worked in lots of agencies, I've designed all sorts of things from sort of scale electric through to whiskey bottles, medical devices, airline interiors, all of these things. But it's quite hard as a proposition for an independent consultant to say, I can do all of this. It's a bit of a sort of jack of all trades. Yeah. And so that really led me to think about specialization and actually take a long, hard look at myself and think, where do I deliver the maximum value in the design process? Although I can go from sort of conception all the way through to sort of production, DFM, sort of reviewing, P1 prototypes, all those kind of things. Actually, where I'm really good, I realized at this very early stage where things are really ambiguous, and a lot of the time, I guess, with the clients I work with, they can't really base their decision-making on past experience or data that they've got or their previous product or even user needs. If we look at a vacuum cleaner or something, it's, hey, let's do some ethno, look at where the problems are and let's solve those, Whereas for me, it's a lot more open. So I guess that's a long way of saying, why am I at this point now? And I guess I describe it as left a brief. Everybody thinks about design and you think, as I did when I was younger, like, okay, it starts with a brief. And of course I have briefs from clients, but in terms of the perception of executional design, what it's about is going, here is the brief and it's product development. And what we're going to do is explore, develop this product and then hopefully ship it. And what I'm really in is a space before then. And I think it's interesting to sort of start thinking, and I don't know whether it only came late to me to sort of realize, how do things actually get made? Not in terms of technically, but in terms of as an organization in a company, how do we decide to make something? When do we decide? What changes what we decide to do? And so if you think about a business, the very early stages of a company deciding what to do is a lot about business strategy. Are we going to transform the business? Are we going to move into a new space? So I guess a recent good example of that is somebody like Sky that I worked with a few years ago, where they've recently launched an amazing TV that were designed by the guys at MAP.
Yeah,
and so they obviously had this the Sky Glass TV, and they obviously had this sort of business decision to think, okay, what we need to get into because of various conditions is to sort of change what we're doing and explore a new product category that can unlock new potential. And so a lot of that involves actually not designers at the very beginning, but the sort of the C-suite, the kind of business managers, the marketing people, the strategists, really trying to work out, I guess, how they're going to transform their business, how they're going to respond to competition, and sort of, the idea is, I guess they call it where to play, where are we going to play? And so that's the C-suite. And often what they'll engage with, if you think about people, is management consultants, and they will come in and tell them, you should go here, you should do this, you should do that. This is particularly when they're trying to sort of create something new. And that then informs the business to then say, okay, we're now going to get into this area. And at that point, what you get, and this again was a sort of a mystery to me to begin with, is really you get this area of what I describe as a sort of discovery and direction, where you have an imperative from the business to say, we're going to move into this new area. So they will use research teams, they will use marketing teams and strategy teams, and I guess innovation teams to sort of explore and try and discover things, but they don't really know what's going to be made. And at the end of that process, you then have a point where they go, okay, this is the opportunity that we're going to go after. So let's go for that. At this point, we can formulate a very clear design brief that has perhaps product requirements, not product specifications, and we can give it over to the design team. And I think part of my work, and what I'd argue, is that design is missing out at that front end, at the sort of management consulting level, and really at the discovery and direction level. And I don't mean that as, there's lots of talk of design having a seat at the table, we need a chief design officer and all of that kind of thing. And I'm less interested in that and somebody sort of trying to speak business language and things like that. But actually, design can be an amazing tool to inspire the whole business when they're doing their work to try and think about these ideas and try and develop things. So that's the sort of space that I've sort of found myself in. And I like to think of myself really as a bridge between sort of business strategy and research and sort of design execution. So actually, none of the work that I do now generally will ship or go to market. So perhaps some people will look at me and go, well, you're not really a designer because you're not shipping products, but I'm designing things. I'm producing physical and digital artifacts. I'm creating vision movies and roadmaps, but the end goal isn't to, turn that into cutting steel or sort of shifting pixels. It's around presenting it to the C-suite to give them a different perspective, to sort of give them a different way of seeing and a different perspective on what they could do to make those decisions more creatively.
Yeah. Do you think that just comes generally from wearing the T-shirt in terms of a career? You've been there, done it, worn the T-shirt.
I don't know, to be honest. Some of it, as I touched on, is kind of where I naturally seem to excel. If I look back on my career, where I was sort of really successful in design teams was sort of that idea generation and thinking strategically. I don't know whether it's part of the sort of engineering background that I'm not intuitive, actually. There's lots of designers that do amazing industrial design. They're really intuitive, and you can't have a very good conversation with them about the rationale. It just came about through their craft, and that was there. And I think for me, what I saw in my career, there was a lot of industrial design that was just wasted time designing the wrong thing. They hadn't really interrogated what they should be doing. And I mean the business, I don't mean the industrial designers necessarily. And I think it's actually, you can kill the opportunity for innovation by writing the wrong brief. And so allowing discovery in your process of throwing your net wider, of thinking more disruptively, of trying to make leaps of imagination, really help you try and unlock new opportunities for your client. But that is all in the context of the kind of clients you work for, because I think the kind of clients I work for are technology led, and they really want to break new ground. Okay, that's the point. It's not, okay, we want another iteration and we want it more efficient and we want it cheaper. This is about actually, is this going to be the sort of heart of our business in 5 years? And so that's the flavor I'm bringing to it. And I'm sure for some people who are in medical device manufacturing or other areas, it's not about that, and that's fine. That's a perfectly valid look. We need to hone and iterate, but this is about actually making leaps. So that sort of, I think, frames what I'm saying here.
Yeah, cool. So if you think about when you started, obviously you've been doing this independently now for 3 years. I'd imagine there's been some good days and some bad days when you work for yourself. But do you look back when you was starting for the first time? Was it a bit of a leap of faith in terms of what made you think, actually, I'm going to work for myself and not work for someone else? What was that moment where you was like, oh, I think I can do it for myself?
I guess lots of designers think about that, and I thought about it over the years. And lots of people used to say to me, I should go off on your own. And I think things that held me back was fear of actually having any work. That's ultimately the leap of faith. I think we can all be brilliant designers and work within the company, whether that's internal or external, and do amazing work and deliver for the client, and the client loves it. But they don't come to that company because of you. Okay. They come to that company because of the brand. And if you look at something like SeymourPowell, they come because of the brand that's been built up, the reputation of Dick and Rich, and the sort of legacy of products there. And I was acutely aware, having worked and succeeded in that business, that you're kind of operating in the slipstream of the brand. And you can delude yourself to think, well, I'm killing it because, Huawei comes to us and Samsung comes to us. I get given this project and I do it and everybody's happy and it's great. So why don't I just do this separately? And you have to realize that at the end of the day, these brands sound big and glamorous, but at the end of the day, it's one person sort of betting on you and saying, yes, I'm going to give you X thousand pounds. I'm going to trust Matthew, or I'm going to trust Brad. And so I guess that came quite late for me because, I was, I'm 51 now. So I guess, I went out on my own when I was 48, get my maths right. So it came about actually through being forced to, in a way, because the company I was working with running the studio in London, Swift Creatives, had to shut because they really suffered from funding issues from China, if you remember when Trump put a lot of barriers on things. So I was kind of out of a job. and some of it for me was like, well, I've done consulting, I've done a lot of it, and I could definitely go to another consultancy, but there's a sort of a drive for me all the way through my career of not sort of standing still. I think from a interest point of view, but from having a very clear view of where I am. I'm a designer, but I'm just on a journey sort of moving through, and there are designers ahead of me and there are designers behind me. And, to be very frank, in agencies, sometimes you just have to get out of the way. You can have older designers that can become an incredible block because of fear, because of worries about being overtaken and being irrelevant, that they sort of cling on to particular skills that maybe they shouldn't do. So I had this idea that, there's an evolution of that. I've done this, and hey, I've been made redundant out of the blue. I got a text message from Christian at Swift Creative saying, bad news from China. Oh, God. Yeah, well, no, they're great. And we parted as friends, but it was a text saying, hey, bad news from China. And we had a call and it was like, we've got to close it. Sorry, and that was sort of game over. But from that, just talking to people, I picked up some work. And I think actually it helped having been at Swift for a couple of years and being responsible for doing a lot more business development and getting myself out there, because ultimately, it comes down to people being aware of you, people being aware of exactly what you do, and people sort of trusting you or thinking that, oh, that's what I need. So there's a whole balance of things that go on there. And a lot of it, I guess, is around what I'm doing now, and why I'm doing this is around my positioning to say that, yes, this is what I think I'm actually really good at. I can do these other things, but there are lots of other people that can do these other things. I can actually do this really well and have a very strong reason to believe and convince clients that they'll give me money and trust me. And if anybody's ever done the sort of business development, you realize how long and the effort it takes to actually win a project. It can take years. Okay, you can be in a company that is having a particular high and a zenith where their brand is so sort of strong and the portfolio is there that all of the work is just incoming. People just want to work with you. And as an individual, that doesn't often happen. It sometimes does with very talented people starting out. If you think about Dick and Rich, they didn't really ever work for anybody, I think. And even people like Barbara Oscarby, out of university, I think they went to New Designers, did the Loop coffee table, and they were away. And I think all of us aren't like that. That's a very rare thing to have somebody like that.
Yeah.
So a long answer, I think.
No worries about that. But in terms of are there any pearls of wisdom or one bit of advice you'd give for someone that's like, doesn't matter if they're 48 or they're 28, but they're like, okay, I'm going to do it for myself. If you look back over the last 3 years, any one bit of advice or bit of guidance you'd say?
Have a pot of money or a client. That's the be all and the end all. That's so nothing happens if you don't have that. So either you have a runway, so you have a certain amount of money, because starting fresh, it's sort of like rolling a drum uphill. There isn't a momentum there. You're trying to get reputation. You're trying to kind of really get things moving. And so you're not likely to be immediately profitable unless you have a client. And there are, it's the age old thing of, oh yeah, I'm going to leave my agency and take a client with me. There's always restrictions and things like that. So those are the two things, and that's it. Don't think about the fancy office. Don't dream and spend all your time on the website and all of that stuff. It's like, if you're going to make the leap, have I got enough money to allow me to do the things I do to start attracting projects coming in? Or have I got a strong relationship that I think, yes, I can make the leap, that, are great. There's a year's worth of work that I can lower my overheads and do those things.
Yeah, things aren't paid until they're paid. That'd be my one.
Yeah,
it's not in until it's in.
That runway is really important, and I guess it's if you look historically back through the people that actually run agencies from like leaving university, a lot of them were supported by their parents. There was money there that meant that they perhaps necessarily didn't have to be profitable for a year or two. And I think as a nascent business, like startups, you can't immediately hit profitability. And that's hard when you're somebody who has a mortgage and doesn't have that sort of support.
So one of the one of my favorite quotes from this podcast over the last 12, 18 months was from I'll see if I can pronounce his name properly because he might still be listening, so I do apologize. It was a name called Cathal, at an agency called Design Partners. And I still remember the phrase, and you used a similar phrase to me when we were emailing the other week, and it was creativity is fragile, was what he said to me, or said to us at the time. And started talking about, it's about music, ironically, I think, and about how sometimes you just have this young person in their back bedroom that's making music and they release a record and it's like it's a completely new thing. Is that quite a big part of what you do in terms of not understanding that creativity is fragile, but just kind of, it's a big part of your skill set, I suppose, in terms of if you're constantly generating ideas and whatnot, that creativity and keeping the people or the companies, and how do you protect the fragility of creativity, I suppose, is what I'm getting around to.
It's very hard. There's two things on fragility. So an idea or a concept is very fragile because it's just an idea. It's not a fully formed product ready to ship. But the other thing is, generally designers are very fragile. No matter how confident we might appear and sort of the places that we've worked, there's a fragility in our belief in ourselves. And it's very easy to lose faith in ideas that actually, instinctively as a designer has some potential. And so you do really have to protect those. And quite how you do that is it's very hard. It's especially hard when you're younger, because certainly for me, I sort of retrained from mechanical engineering into industrial design. And so you're there trying to think that you're good and do these things whilst trying to battle with the client or even the internal team to protect an idea. And I think the thing that you really have to try and seek, and it's very hard to do, is have some confidence that it will be okay in the end. Because worrying about things, trying to solve all the problems that an idea might throw up, really puts a block on you moving that idea forward. And you suddenly start having to actually solve the whole thing. And at the beginning, you're not trying to do that. You're trying to probe. You're trying to have that idea. And that idea isn't necessarily the starting idea. Isn't the end idea. It's where you start. And by looking at that idea and interrogating it and testing it, that helps you actually uncover new ideas. And so actually often the idea that you think is really fragile isn't the thing that eventually gets there. So I guess one of the things I'd say is don't hold that idea too tightly and think that's the be all and end all, because it's just an idea. It's not fully formed, but you need to sort of have confidence. And that comes a lot more easily when you've done it for a number of years and you haven't been fired by your companies, promoted, because deep down as a designer, I'm quite insecure about my abilities, but it's only, my confidence has only grown through the validation of my peers that I really respect. That's really at the heart of it, where I think a lot of designers feed from. We can all be pleased with LinkedIn and our titles and our reputation and speaking and things like that. But I think a true designer, is really seeking that idea of validation from people they respect. And if you get that over time, I think it builds your confidence to then have that idea and argue, but also be open to have it interrogated. And I think the thing I learned at SeymourPowell, which I really loved, and it's kind of why I went to that sort of agency when I was drawn to them, was that wasn't a very strong house style. It wasn't about fulfilling Dick or Rich's vision. It was about getting to the best idea. And I think if you can instill that in a team, and what you're searching for is that, and try and lose the ego about wanting it to be my idea that gets through. And I know within automotive and a lot of actually in-house consumer electronic companies operate like that it's a bit of a battle and you succeed by having your concept selected. But I think these days it's actually about, can you get to that best idea? So if it is fragile, invite people in, allow them to interrogate it, because they'll actually help you move it into a better idea. But you kind of got to let go of that idea that, this is mine. And when it comes out in whatever form, I can say, I did this, like how many, it's why when I used to design products that went to market, I just say, I helped design this. You can't say you designed it, very rarely, unless perhaps you're doing furniture and you've just done the chair and it's all you.
I find sometimes when you even look at the way that designers present their work in a portfolio, for example, it's very much I rather than we. as a
Yeah.
whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, I don't know, and whether that behaviour will change as
I think it depends on, it depends on the designer. I think
Yeah.
within a portfolio and a job interview, you have to present the context of the project and tell that story. But for somebody hiring, they want to know, okay, but what was the bit that you did?
Yeah, can't tell you how many V8 vacuum cleaners I've seen over the years and gone, but I'm pretty sure I saw that in a portfolio last week. It's like, did you do this or did they do this? So it's
very difficult though when you're younger, Brad. You know, like you haven't got a portfolio, or you've got one from university, and you know it's very hard to get a job. You're trying to present yourself in your best light, and it's actually the same with companies. When you're pitching to big companies, you're presenting yourself in your best light. But the thing is not to try and be dishonest about it, because ultimately, you know, you'll be found out, because when you get hired and you sit down, it's like, okay, let's produce some of that, and it comes through clearly.
Yeah, you mentioned SeymourPowell there. Just quickly, what was it about SeymourPowell that was a great place, because you was there for a number of years? I think you was there for like 10 years.
Yeah.
Was that different to other agencies you've been at, or just what was it that made it so special for you that you was there for a period of time?
Yeah, it was totally different and special, and it wasn't the coffee. You know, it was the quality of the projects and the quality of the thinking and the quality of the design work.
Yeah,
you know, I was sort of blown away and intimidated to begin with, and slowly through time kind of got to fit in and actually somehow keep up. And as a designer, my focus is always one, you know, just wanting to work with super smart people, wanting to be inspired by them and wanting to learn. And going back to that point of they were trying to get to the best idea. So I wasn't trying to fulfill the vision of Dick Powell or Richard Seymour. You could actually, once you'd gained their trust, be proper collaborators with them. Except when it comes to the awards, then they'll barge you out the way. So I think that was it. And that's what's driven my whole career. You know, why am I doing what I'm doing now is because I think this is the best way that I can work on the best projects and actually focus on the work. And I think that's something that's interesting as you get older and become a design leader. There's many hats that a design leader has to wear. And I think sometimes actually there's three main ones. And I think we can only do two. And so, you know, if I can kind of explain that, I think as a leader in design, you should be leading the work. So I don't mean actually doing the work, right? I've done the sketch, here it is. But you should actually be able to tell the people within your team, to inspire them, to tell them without being too specific about where you think this is going, to respond to their work and do that kind of thing. And that's the most vital thing, okay, as a design leader. The other aspects of being a design leader is the sort of managerial, emotional side of, I need to build a design team. I need to keep people happy. They want to be promoted. I want to train them up. I need to, I need to keep this thing rolling. And that's a very operational side of things, really. And actually, you can kind of get bogged down in that. And then I guess internally, or in any company, there becomes an operational relationship perspective as a design leader, where you're trying to build relationships with other departments, you know, to help create space for your fragile ideas to sort of have an input and have an impact. And then if you're external, there's obviously the business development side, where you've got to actually go out and hunt for things. And all of those things, I don't think it's possible for one person to really do really well. I think architects do this really well, that they hand over a lot of the operational side of their practices to CEOs and chief operating officers, and they really concentrate on leading the work. And in a way, the balance I've got to by being external is, I'm old and experienced, but I'm still leading the work. I haven't ended up into it, and I've deliberately tried to stop being in a corner where I'm sort of just managing people. And I guess there's a discussion around people being individual contributors within organizations who don't have people reporting to them, but lead the team and things like that.
Yeah. Do you remember when you first got into design, did you always want to be in a leadership capacity, a managerial capacity? Something just as your career develops, you go, yeah, we'll give that a go? Or has it always been the intention from day one to?
Well, I wanted to make it.
Yeah.
The first thing is, you know, because when I left college, I didn't know if I'd even get a job and whether I was any good. So that was the driver. And then over time, I think there's a dynamic around always wanting to learn and sort of following the things that interest you, but being aware, as I said before, that you're on a designer journey that designers, you know, going back through time have been on. I'm sure if we were some designers sat talking about the guys who worked in the Edison studio, they'd have the same moans as talking about, working in certain studios in London today. There's these dynamics going on. There are younger people coming up who are bringing on new tools, which is amazing, that perhaps you can't get into because you're too busy doing all these other things. And you need to get out of the way of these people. You need to move on and think about, how can I add value to this team? And it is sort of what's driven me to think, actually, how can my design skills really add value? And at this point in my career, it's not worrying about curvature, continuity. It's not worrying about the details. That is a valid role for a senior person to actually worry about that and be a real craftsperson. But for me, I saw more value in actually helping to inspire the business, giving them a broader vision, because at the moment, if you're a design leader, unless you're sort of Elon Musk or Steve Jobs, who has an innate idea and vision, your kind of sources of inspiration to lead the business come from, I guess, what McKinsey are blogging on LinkedIn, or some sort of article that you read, or when you went to CES or you read Fast Company and things like that. And I think that's not specific enough. That's journalists writing about things, and that's companies trying to sell you things. So what's really important is how do business leaders become inspired and get ideas that are relevant for their brand, that are ahead of time, that they can see and have a vision of a possible 5 years ahead, to give them some clarity to allow them to really properly do their job and make those decisions in a really informed way, but informed by creativity, not just informed by numbers and kind of what's trending in terms of blockchain or 5G or whatever it is.
It's the metaverse now. I had to find out what that meant the other day. I'm starting to get old.
But the metaverse is something that goes back and was the original conception of, I think, of what the internet might be. And I think from a business leader point of view, it's just a buzzword. So actually a project on really historically looking back about understanding what the metaverse is really valuable as a business leader, to think, actually, is this the next new thing? And is it relevant for our business now? And it might not be, but you've explored it and you've decided that actually it's really relevant for Facebook, or it's really relevant for Google. But for us, we will wait for these bigger brands to define that, and then we can respond. It very much depends on what kind of company you are, what leader you are.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. Just quickly, whilst we're kind of on this kind of theme, how does design, or I don't know, to be a bit more specific, industrial design, how does it break away then from a bit of a preaching to the converted exercise, which sometimes I've certainly experienced when I've been on, I don't know, meetings or networking events or whatever, where it's designers talking to designers about the power of design, and it's like, and then nothing really kind of gets done at the end of it. Whereas you're at the coalface, I suppose, in terms of C-suite business and that side of things. How do designers break away from just talking about the power of design to other designers? How do they?
Well, I would sort of argue that we shouldn't have to talk about the power of design. Hasn't that been won? When I was growing up and looking at people like Dick Powell, they put a lot of effort into talking about design, explaining it and showing the value. But demonstrably, the way our industry has changed, how people like Apple have risen to enormous success, and Tesla, they've really proved the value of design, I think. And the sort of companies that operate now know the value of design. That's why there isn't so many design consultancies anymore, or they're smaller, that everybody's gone in-house. Because when I started out, it was a lot more about, well, we had the engineering team, and every couple of years when we needed a new product, we would hire in the consultants and they could do their little bit. And then they would sort of disband us as a way and move on. And I think they've realized, no, actually, we need to build design into the core of our business. So, I would say that battle has been won.
Okay.
But if you're actually encountering a client who needs to be sold on the power of design, I'd question whether they're the right client for you. And as you get older, you start to realize of like, what is the right client for me? I mean, when you don't have any work, then perhaps any client who's got some money is the right client. But you've got to realize that, are they aligned with your values in terms of believing in design? Are they coming to you because of your unique point of view? Is this about authorship? Are they coming to Matthew or Brad or whoever because I really like their point of view? I really like the kind of aesthetic or just the ideas that they get to, and I want to buy that. Or are they just buying a capability? Oh, we haven't got enough 3D modelers. We just need some people to come in and do that. And are they viewing you as an interchangeable kind of resource? And we went with the cheapest agency. There's all three. And you can understand it in a way, because if I was going to hire an accountant, I kind of struggle to know, is that a really good accountant?
Yeah.
An average, a good, workaday accountant, or a terrible accountant. So for me, one of the checks I think is understanding, is that, do we have aligned values? So our work and my work will be impactful and have impact. I haven't got time to battle. Life's too short to battle and try and convince people about design. There's enough people that believe in design. Don't waste your time trying to convince people about design. That battle's been won. And use that as a filter to say, what you'll find actually, if they don't really value it, you can try and convince them and get them on board, and you might win them over, but that's a lot more work. So potentially that's eating into your profit, and there's a lot more risk that there will be more battles, that at each meeting you're continually having to justify, why is this relevant? So steer clear of those people.
Okay. Yeah, fair enough. I'm conscious we did have an Instagram question come through, and I'll just get it just so I don't say something out of I don't say it wrong, basically, because that'd be the last thing if I give a question to you and it's like, that's not the question I actually asked. So it's from a chap called Tony Alkinson. I believe you know Tony from
I've worked with Tony actually in the past.
From Tony. So he asked advice for selling to a non-creative client C-suite on the value of design when you can't talk exact return of investment, which might be, I suppose, a key pillar for what they might be after in some cases. Any thoughts on that?
I think I've already answered that.
Yeah, I was going to say,
don't work with them. I think the thing is, ultimately what it comes down to in design is actually about when you're an independent, like I know, well, Tony has his own studio now. when you're trying to build a relationship with somebody, is you need to be able to take them with you. And if there's too much of a gap, like I've said, it's like it's not worth your time. You're going to waste it. But if you think that they can be won over, then I think there's ways that you can think about doing small pieces of work with them first to show the value of design and how quickly you can move, especially external agencies. I mean, they can come back and deliver something in 3 weeks. And I don't mean about hundreds of renderings and things like that, but about delivering some value very quickly and convincing the client that, okay, there is some value in working with these people. And some of that is about realizing that, yes, this project, I've scoped it out and it's, 100,000, it's 200,000 or whatever, but who's going to give you that money straight off the bat? And if they're unsure, so if you could structure the way you engage with them to say, well, look, why don't we try this? Let's have a little phase. And I've done it sometimes, within an agency context, would be, well, look, we'll try it for a few weeks. And if you don't like it, we won't charge you. We have that much confidence in it. But I think if there's too much of a gap about return on investment, it's like, I'm sorry, this isn't like sort of TV advertising where you can spend money, on design and you can see the metric tick up, a year later. I think that's hard. But I think it is difficult when these people aren't creative, but I think if they're not creative, they should certainly be doing enough reading to understand that value of design. I think the challenge though then is how do you work with people who don't understand the design process? Because you're having to explain things and educate, and actually you have to work out as an independent designer and even as an agency, is it worth me investing time in educating this client? Because my job isn't really to educate clients. My job is to do amazing work, have a lot of fun, have an impact, and make a bit of money. Yeah, so I think you have to balance that.
Yeah, and I suppose that becomes easier when the client has complete trust in you. If you feel they have a doubt, then does that impact on that creativity and that work you can deliver?
Having complete trust in you is very different from not believing in the value of design or not understanding that. So that's sort of a separate thing. And I think, like any relationship, it takes time to build that trust, and I guess that's why a lot of uneducated design buyers, let's say, who have been put in a position in a new company, they're head of something, I've got a budget, who am I going to go for? Then you will go for the expected brands, because there's safety in a brand, because a brand is about trust. So great, I will go for this design agency because they're known, they've been going for 20 years. Oh, look, there's 40 of them. I'm not going to go for 3 people. But actually, ultimately, when those people become more educated, you can realize that actually, working for somebody like Tony, you might actually get a lot better service. They might, you just might have an affinity there. So I think relationships are the really important thing with clients.
Yeah.
And having suitability. Are you compatible as a client and as a creative? Because if you're not, then you're just sort of, you're delaying the inevitable breakup.
Yeah, so better just to cut ties a little bit earlier, isn't it? I've certainly been there.
Yeah, I think so, and it's hard, and maybe because I'm older, that I don't want to waste time sort of with this educating and struggling. I want to sort of recognize people that are open and willing to see the value, or already see the value, and then hey, can we concentrate on the design and coming up with some great ideas? That's the thing. All this peripheral can really weigh you down and slow you down and take so much energy. I mean, to actually just do the design work, to move it forward, but then actually to sell it within the business, that's where all the effort is, to sort of help, sell the idea within the business, to help people have a shared understanding of your vision. Because we can all, designers have this great ability to sort of see things as they can be. And we can immediately make leaps to these new things from the very lowest fidelity prototype, whether that's physical or digital, but other people can't. So, a lot of my effort, I would say, when I was younger, it was all about the end result and how I was judged on those renderings coming out that we put in the final deck and then sent off to the client. Whereas I would say, that was the end of the project and hopefully they liked it. Whereas, as you get older, you realize that actually you're probably 2/3 the way through, or maybe 50% through the project by delivering the idea. It's about how do you sell that idea? How do you tell the right story that places it in the right context to say that, yes, this is valid for the business. It's not just Matthew's idea. Isn't this shiny and lovely? Isn't it shiny and lovely? Yes, but I don't know whether I want a shiny, lovely thing, or I don't know whether that's the shiny, lovely thing. And so a lot of your effort as a designer is then to think about how you make it relevance and put it in context. And I don't just mean like context renderings, but context in terms of how does this fit in with the roadmap of where the business is going related to where they set the business strategy. And maybe the first thing that we design, especially in this early stage where what you tend to do is make a leap 5 years ahead, create a product experience. And it's incredibly complicated to look at. And internally, they don't always understand it. But as a designer, that helps you move to a new place. But what you then have to do with that sort of 5 years out idea is to go, okay, that is where they might be in 5 years. So how do we simplify this down to the first step? What's the generation 1 product that we do? But to have that vision is incredibly important, to understand it, especially when it's a new experience. When it's a vacuum cleaner, fine, I'm cleaning my stairs. I just want to clean them better or lighter. But when it's something like using computer vision and whole room experiences to have new kind of experiences with technology, using Alexa and doing all these things, people originally haven't done those things. And so in my process, actually, what I've started to do over the last 10 years is put a lot more focus on designing the experience
rather than the product.
Yeah, because the product, you design and develop that when you know it's valid, but how do you test that? And actually, to put yourself in this future context, you can do very easily with actually simulations, with using video, with using sort of testing to actually bring those things to life. And really, for me, it's actually about prototyping the experience to understand what it will feel like. Because particularly with technology products, there's a lot of barriers to adopting new things. You look at something like Alexa, the reason we adopt it into our home is because, actually, it's a speaker with a new kind of interface. It's not a totally new thing. So, a lot of my work is designing that experience. And actually, I would describe it more like previs. So in movies, if you think about how directors are conceiving of their movies before they start filming. So if you think about filming as being product development, okay, we've got the script, we've got the storyboards, we've got the crew, we know what we're doing, let's film it and let's release it in the cinema. So really what I'm doing is to go, okay, we have a concept. Okay, it's Alien versus Predator. Oh, well, what does that look like? Let's storyboard that. And so I actually use a lot of techniques from theater. So writing scripts, actually doing improvisation with people to run through these new experiences. And yes, they have digital and physical things, but you're not trying to polish those and you're not trying to focus on those. Those are just elements that enable them. And so a lot of the times we'll keep them very simple and basic and really focus on the core archetypes of what those products are actually doing for you. Because the kind of new things we're trying to do is not a neat way to get from one app to the other or to improve something. It's like oh no, I'm using folding screens now and able to do totally different things. Or, I'm in front of a TV with a camera that has computer vision that allows me to do exercise or create, different experiences.
Yeah, as someone that's like, I'm conscious of time, as someone that's I suppose you must always be thinking about the future. I take it you must always be in that kind of like looking forward type of thing. Are there any?
I'm not looking forward though. Like, how can you look? You can't. It's not like I'm not a futurologist. That's this sort of bogus idea that somehow I can cast forward. I think what you're doing with experience is sort of understanding and picking up on weak signals here and extrapolating forward. Okay, and you can be wrong, and everybody's wrong. If you just look at the product failures, actually product design and innovation is incredibly wasteful in a way, because most of it fails in terms of, oh, that thing didn't go to market. But actually, in building something, in developing it, you learn so much. If you look at something like Google Glass, an amazing piece of hardware, an amazing piece of technology, they could have actually prototyped the experience first to realize they'd look a bit like a glass hole before they spent those millions of dollars. But they learned an incredible amount from that, I think. And even things like Dyson with doing their car, I think he invested billions. And to get to a point is equally as valuable to say, we've explored all this, we've spent all of this money, and we're not going to go there. That's sort of not a failure.
Yeah, that's what it's one of those where I suppose for the people that maybe lost their job, it might have felt like a failure, but for them as a business, long term, they may reap benefits from that process that happened. I take it.
For a business, it's about how do we survive on into the future, and are you going to continue a direction that isn't financially viable, or you're not geared up for it, or you don't have the right technology. And I can imagine the kind of IP and sort of technical capabilities they've developed, in batteries and motors and things that I'm sure stand them in good stead in other areas. Yeah, but the point goes back to this idea of looking into the future. I think so. It's not future gazing, but at the same time, as designers, we do a lot of divergent thinking to sort of spread ourselves really wide to understand different factors and actually then be inspired to make these leaps of imagination, which you can post-rationalize it and make it all sound logical. But unfortunately, there's a point where a designer feeds their head with research, okay? You can't research the solution. I work with companies where we can actually end up with some quite poor research that doesn't really inspire you, or you can get amazing research, but the answer isn't going to be there in the research. What it's going to do is uncover small insights that feed into your head to help you think about the problem in a different way than just being, Matthew at his desk, in London, and think broader, think about different people. And that then allows you as a designer, those things sort of brew in your head and distill, and then you make those leaps. And for me, looking forward, it's a lot about understanding technology. I mean, people are fairly consistent in their needs and behaviors in terms of from a human level point of view. And it's kind of looking at what is the potential of technology to be useful, and also understand where you are. If you're projecting forward in a sort of a sci-fi way, you're back to the movies where you're doing a Tom Cruise idea. But so much of the innovation that takes place, if you take something like folding screens, is to understand how mature that technology is. And the fact that Samsung released their folding screen, their first one a couple of years ago, they've been working on folding screens for 25 years on that technology. Okay, it's just at this point in time, there's a couple of factors that mean they can release it. The most important one is actually around realizing that they can make it economically. And okay, the first few were not very reliable, but actually getting the right yield rate from a factory is the sort of be all and end all. But at the same time, it's about being cutting edge and moving forward. So I think as a designer, it's understanding where things are going from a technology point of view and a societal level, but you're projecting forward, you're looking around you. And ultimately, I think at the end of the day, it's to realize that the future isn't written, it's not there set in stone. I think, and it's us as designers who are creating that future. So we can't validate these things. I think at certain points, enough companies, work with designers that they trust to go, okay, we're going to choose you to sort of define this, and it will succeed or fail.
Yeah. The question I was going to come on to wasn't to let's predict the next 5 years. It was more, are there things that are exciting you right now in terms of, because you're working left of brief? Are
Yes.
there industry spaces that really excite you? Because sometimes you turn the news on, it's a little bit doom and gloom, isn't it? But I don't necessarily subscribe to that. So, are there things that are exciting you right now in terms of, people
I think,
like not to go specific and in
yeah,
products,
yeah,
but just generally industry spaces that excite you currently? And
yeah. I think the point now, touching on, you're talking about doom and gloom, is you can't let that affect you as a designer. As a designer, you have to be an optimist because you're trying to create something new. Yes, you have to solve problems and you do worry, about unintended consequences. But what you're really trying to do at the creation of an idea is unlock new ideas and think about that potential. And I think for me, because I'm at the early stages, disruption really interests me, because it's a challenge to the status quo. And it means, I think, that if a company is challenged, designers have permission to be more radical to try and address that. So if we take something like sustainability, I helped design the Fairphone back in 2014. And I remember talking to Tez, one of the co-founders there, and she was saying, you're working on this project with us, and we're looking at repairability, recyclability, all of this thing. How do you think this will change the kind of projects that you're going to get moving forward? And I said, well, probably not a lot, because there isn't that demand. And in a way, Fairphone were trying to push this agenda and they've succeeded, but it's taken 7 years. And so actually what I'm interested in, at the heart of it, we have concerns now about global heating and the idea that we have to change. And so I think really there needs to be a wartime effort for people to actually radically change those things. And so when I look at things like repairability and recyclability and how we can apply that to products, that's great. And we should be doing this, but we should be looking at more a systemic level of how we create products and what we create. And that's why I'm sort of really interested in things like remanufacturing, the idea of a designer not starting afresh with a new thing, but actually, having a product that comes back after 5 years and thinking, well, how can we create a new generation out of this? So be quite radical about how we create products in the future. I think the other area that really interests me is the idea of things being responsive. And I've talked about whole room computing, but the kind of sensing and the IoT that we've got now within our homes and within our workspaces means that environments can be aware of us, that they respond to us and they understand what we might need and they can be prescient. So using things like computer vision, machine learning and things like that to actually allow our products to respond to us and offer us new and interesting things. And for me, it's about that newness. It's not about, oh, great, I can make the washing easier and I can make tidying up easier. It's about actually, as we've seen over the last few years, I can run businesses from my home. I can do exercise in my home and things like that. So for me, a lot of the time it is driven by technology, but then this overarching systemic thing that's going on around, in a way, challenging the idea of capitalism, because at the moment companies are rewarded for growth. We need to sell more things. We sold more, brilliant. Like in the future, it's going to be, I think, metrics around actually you didn't sell as many. It's about how you actually increase the sort of the value of the customers you have without selling them more stuff. And so as a designer, that's incredibly exciting to think about, great, can we now actually have permission to think about designing within a circular economy where products aren't designed, sold and forgotten. So those kind of things I think we're going to be forced to have to do. And I sort of talk about a wartime effort because I think that's the right description, that it means that everybody has a singular focus, that we kind of a consensus now that things need to change, that the climate has been damaged and we need to make adjustments. And we can't just tweak things and make it from recycled materials anymore. Yes, do that immediately, but start looking at what you can do differently. And then so for as a designer, that really opens up opportunities, I think.
Super topical, isn't it, with what's happening, the conference up in Glasgow we're recording. So I don't know if that's still going on, but has been over the last few days or so. So it's super topical. I think sustainability is one of those areas where you could just spend hours talking about it, and you could go off in tangents and stuff. It's an incredibly complex topic.
I mean, nobody knows the answer. It's when we're working with Fairphone, it's like, well, there isn't one right solution. It's so complicated. Some things are clear though, that keeping a product for longer is generally better, unless it's more polluting, something like a car with a catalytic converter. But what I'm quite interested in is how some technology products could start to live around for longer because their archetypes and technology is more stable. So very hard to make a folding screen at the moment, or a VR headset or an AR headset that can last for years because the technology is evolving. But our smartphones, our laptops, our TVs, I mean, they're starting to be products like radios and toasters. You know, if you go back in time, radios, toasters, washing machines, they were technology. They were changing quickly. They were evolving. Now they just become like pieces of furniture. They're more what we call Longwave products. And I think there's an opportunity to be more radical with those things. Whereas some things, if it's very new, it's very difficult then to be stuck with that and not take advantage of advances in technology. And I think for designers, that's the balance of, we would really like these things to hang around for longer, to be more useful, for the owner of those products to take more pride in them, you know, because when you have pride and when you desire them, you keep things for longer, you know, and a lot of, unfortunately, what design is about is designing new stuff. And I love designing new stuff. And we attracted to the shiny new things, which makes the thing that used to be new not look new anymore. And so we're driven to replace it. So I think those kind of challenges are really sort of interesting.
Yeah. We're coming up to an hour, and when a question we ask every guest, some have ducked the question, I'll be honest with you. But a question we ask every guest is, what is the strangest brief that you've ever come across? Now, we've had a few corkers, I won't lie. One was Dr. Coffins was quite recent. That was an interesting one. And then we've had some weird ones. And I think it's something that just raises a smile to a designer or two when they have some briefs that get floated past their desk. If you had a few over the last 20, 25 years.
I've had really, really stupid ones that often come from the desire of companies to lock in their consumers. And I guess I'd describe it as the sort of Nespresso of X or Y. There's a product that people use that they really love, but can we lock them into a consumable so we have a continuing revenue stream? So those are ridiculous. But actually relating to coffins,
you've done some work, haven't you, within that kind of...
Well, the most bizarre thing I ever did was probably about 6 years ago now. It was working with what I'd describe as a visionary billionaire and collaborating with the architect Bjarke Ingels on reinventing a memorial experience. So this billionaire had the idea of, how do we celebrate people's lives, allow people to celebrate their stories and retell them over the generations. So what that meant is the architect was building an incredibly visionary building, and my job was to design what we ended up calling an artifact that would contain people's stories. So it would be a media that would record our stories. They would be able to be retold. But the catch really was that this thing had to survive and be able to retell these stories for 1,000 years. And so the client came to us saying, we'll put some NFC in it and we'll do all of this. And we're saying, look, that technology will be gone in a few years. What we need to do is look at different technology. So ultimately, we ended up designing an artifact that could last for 1,000 years, that you could still get the information off it and almost build the reader that played that medium in 1,000 years. So that's probably the craziest brief I've ever done, and was an amazing project.
Yeah, and is it one of those, even though it's kind of that world, you could then take some learnings to other things you've done with, with different companies?
I think a lot of it is about trying to look at things differently, about having a challenge, about celebrating, something like this was less about the funeral service, but the memorial service. And how do you create a product that fits sensitively into that really emotional time for people? And having sensitivity to the user was something that was really interesting. But also that idea of thinking about technology that could last 1,000 years. Because if you look, when we think about technology, let's future-proof it. And you think what we should do then is choose the very latest technology, because that's going to future-proof us the most. But actually, there's great examples of that, where the BBC, when they did a recreation of the Doomsday Project in the 80s, they decided to store this new Doomsday in 1985 on a Laserdisc, because it was the very latest technology. Well, the thing was unreadable 4 years later because that format wasn't adopted. So actually part of the project, looking at 1,000 years, was to look back into the past, not to the future, and say, what has survived from 1,000 years ago? And you actually get you get inspiration from the Egyptians, and realizing it's immutable materials like stone, like metal, like glass, that can be around, that don't suffer from digital rot. And then how can you use the latest technology to encode that onto these materials that can sort of last forever? So we're sort of going out there a little bit, but it actually starts to be relevant. Right, 1,000 years is insane and that's crazy, but it really challenges you to really be considerate of the materials that you use. And that's super applicable then to think when you're designing and actually have that idea that I've got to design and think about what that is like in the future. Whereas generally when you're designing a physical product, you're designing for manufacture and use. Yeah. And so those materials are selected to be the cheapest you can, the easiest to manufacture, and last for a certain amount of time. So it reframes your attitude to how you think about products, to think about the life after you've designed and sold it. And I think at the moment, companies don't do a lot of that, and we're going to have to do moving forward.
And I think about, if you think about, what was that, a year ago or 2 years ago, that was a bit of a time of doom and gloom, wasn't it? Kind of lockdown 1 or whatever. And it was like, God, no one's going to get a job ever again. But do you look forward now as like, it's a good time to be in industrial design? Whereas at the time it felt like, it's going to be tough for you to get your first job. And it was.
Well, it's always tough to get your first job. Yeah. And I graduated into a recession in 1991. So it's always been like that. The reason I did that event was it was lockdown, so it was particularly tough. But actually to try and give younger designers this idea and have some kind of empathy with them, to realize all the senior people that you see have been there and been through that we might appear to be super confident and successful or not, but we all started where they were, and you can be successful, but it doesn't feel like it looking forward. Looking back, you can be more confident. And so I think understanding that it's always been tough, you've always got to work hard to try and succeed. But I think what I was doing with that talk was to have senior leaders who were relating to them on their level and so we talked about our experiences about graduating, how we felt, the fact that I got fired from Priestman Good and wasn't successful in some places, because you can carve out your LinkedIn profile to seem like a bit like a product being developed, that it was all successful and there was a continued stream of success. And you realize as an industrial designer or any kind of designer, it's sort of, it can be a battle and it's not easy, and it doesn't suddenly get easy. And you go through different aspects of things. It's always changing. But I think, it's a great time to be a designer, to have a possibility to really try and change things. And I hope there's an imperative around companies to have ambition to allow us to do that kind of thing.